The ocean would never be the same again. In the summer of 1975, the action thriller Jaws terrified movie audiences around the world.
I don't know of any other picture that has hit a primal nerve like this.
The film made millions.
He said, "Do you guys know how rich you're going to be?"
Became a pop culture phenomenon.
I have never, ever in my life witnessed that reaction to a movie.
And in the process, forever changed the business of Hollywood filmmaking.
Jaws was positioned as a summer movie-going event, and that was kind of a different approach.
But bringing Jaws to the big screen was no easy task. In the next 2 hours, we'll take an inside look at the making of a cinematic classic.
Things turned ugly and the weather got bad and the shark was sinking like the Titanic.
The story of Jaws is one of too much alcohol.
He was dear, bright, flirtatious, and drunk most of the time.
Too much temptation.
For some people, it was more than just looking.
And too much flesh.
Steven said it almost got an X rating because of you.
There was the temperamental star who didn't always behave.
As soon as we put the shark in the salt water, it started deteriorating.
And an ambitious young director who almost drowned under the pressure of a troubled shoot.
There are no memorable moments on Jaws for me. There's a lot of moments that I like to forget.
Through exclusive interviews with the film's stars, as well as rare behind-the-scenes photos and footage, you'll hear the tale of a legendary movie that attacked and nearly swallowed its creators. This is the story of Jaws.
One more time.
The E! True Hollywood story.
And cut.
Her life's ambition was to be a star.
Never recover from the public scandal.
On June 20th, 1975, moviegoers lined up for blocks to watch a terrifying film about an underwater predator. Word of mouth spread fast. Co-star Richard Dreyfuss.
When the film was over, the first audience that I was in burst into this enormous applause, and I mean, whoa.
Jaws co-star Roy Scheider was also stunned.
I remember coming out of the lobby, and we got out on the sidewalk, and Dreyfuss took a running leap and jumped in my arms. And he's screaming, "We're a hit, we're a hit, we're a hit!"
Co-star Lorraine Gary.
My feeling at seeing the film, I was astounded. I had no idea that it would be such a big production.
After 11 weeks, Jaws cruised past The Godfather to become the highest-grossing movie at that point in time. Before Jaws premiered, creature features had been a Hollywood staple for years.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
Monsters from outer space and the deep sea were always an audience favorite. In 1973, producers Richard Zanuck and David Brown were convinced they found the next great movie monster. The men were well-respected Hollywood veterans who just wrapped filming on their highly anticipated feature, The Sting.
My wife, Helen Gurley Brown, editor of Cosmopolitan, used to bring home little index cards of books that had been submitted to Cosmopolitan. And on one of those little cards was the word Jaws by Peter Benchley and a brief synopsis of the book with the added comment, "might make a movie."
Producer Richard Zanuck.
David Brown, my partner for some 18 years, and I read the book simultaneously. He was on the East Coast, I was out here in Los Angeles.
And we compared notes by telephone.
I remember David saying, "How do we make it?" And I said, "Let's worry about making it once we get it."
The producers bagged the deal by offering $150,000 for the film rights before the book was even published, a huge sum in those days. Peter Benchley, a first-time novelist, wrote the riveting story of a man-eating great white shark that terrorizes a New England beach town.
In 1964, I read a small piece in the New York Daily News about a fisherman who had caught a 4,550-pound great white shark off Montauk, Long Island. And I didn't have any idea that such a critter existed. But I sort of tucked that little clipping away and didn't do anything with it. Then in 1971, Tom Congan of Doubleday encouraged me to use the clipping and the idea that I had wrapped around it. What would happen if a great shark came around to a community and wouldn't go away?
Zanuck and I thought it would make a movie, but had we read it twice, I think we would have abandoned it. Because how on earth were you going to get a man who jumps up on the stern of a boat and is swallowed by a shark? All of that stuff was, from a production standpoint, was totally impossible.
Even so, Zanuck and Brown believed Jaws would make a terrific thriller. They convinced Universal Studios to finance the film, hired Benchley to write the screenplay, and began looking for a director.
An unspoken part of the deal that we made for the book was to use a director of the agency who sold us the book. And we picked a director by the name of Dick Richards. He'd done a picture that I was very impressed by called The Culpeper Cattle War. And so we brought Dick to New York to meet Benchley.
And during our long conversation about Peter Benchley's book,
Dick Richards went into a very elaborate and quite well thought out opening where you see the quiet village, you see the water, everything's calm and peaceful, and suddenly he said, the whale jumps out at you. And there was a silence around the table. And Benchley said, you mean the shark, Dick, don't you?
He said he always wanted to make a movie about a whale.
Kept referring to the whale.
Benchley now had had a couple more martinis, as we all had, and he said, it's a shark, damn it, the shark. And I said to Richards, I said, Dick, for God's sakes, it's a shark.
By the third time he had said that, we knew pretty well that this fellow was not going to be directing the movie.
That fateful meeting opened the door for 26-year-old Steven Spielberg. The young director was just coming off his first feature film, The Sugarland Express. Zanuck and Brown were familiar with Spielberg's work, having produced his movie.
I was on the location with him every day during the Sugarland Express, gotten to know him very well, had recognized on the first day, actually, that I was dealing with a director with tremendous talent.
Talent and ambition. Spielberg was constantly on the lookout for new material. The director stumbled on his next project while hanging out in Zanuck and Brown's office. Screenwriter Carl Gottlieb, author of The Jaws Log.
He picked up the script and read it and said, I want to do this.
But Spielberg began to have second thoughts. The director was concerned Jaws was too similar to one of his earlier projects, Duel. The 1971 TV movie centered on a renegade truck, another unpredictable and frightening predator.
He may not have wanted to be known as a shark and truck director.
Spielberg took the book and read it and reread it and came into the office and said no.
Former president of MCA, Sid Sheinberg.
To say he was a little reluctant to do Jaws was a gross understatement. He was desperate not to do Jaws.
Fortunately, Richard Zanuck knew just how to close the deal.
I was tipped off by the production manager that Steven was going to come into my office and resign. So I quickly changed into this shirt that he'd made up. And I said, Steven, look at this shirt. I'm wearing this shirt that you had made up. Don't tell me you've lost enthusiasm for this. You have to go deep down and get that original enthusiasm back.
Spielberg did. On June 21st, 1973, after some soul-searching, the director signed on. Film critic Leonard Maltin.
He was probably the perfect choice to direct this movie because he needed it. He needed this film to be good. He needed this film to be a hit.
Getting Spielberg on board was simple compared to the producer's next task.
We always felt with this film that the shark was the star, that we as filmmakers were going to live and die, succeed or fail with that shark.
In the winter of 1973, 37-year-old art director Joe Alves was brought in to start designing the shark.
A lot of people told us there were things that we couldn't do, in the ocean and with the animatronic creature. We said, no, we're going to do it full size, real ocean.
Experts at Universal Studios were skeptical.
The attitude from the in-house special effects department was pretty negative about building the shark. Said, oh, it'll take us 3 years, it's very complicated. Besides, we got the Hindenburg we're doing, and, you know, blah, blah, blah.
But Alves was undeterred.
After exhausting Disney and a few other studios that would build it but not take it on location, from Disney, I discovered Bob Matty. And Bob Matty had been retired, but he had built the giant squib for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So I met with him, and I showed him a lot of sketches, and he said, yeah, we could do it, and here's how we could do it. And he went away and came back a week or so later with this sort of clothes hanger wire kind of shark that you pull the lever and the mouth open and all this stuff. And we showed it to the powers that be, and they said, yeah, that'll work.
And there was some feeling that we should make it smaller.
Water pictures were normally done in a tank, on the back lot, or on a stage. And Stephen and I looked at some of these pictures, and he was really firm about this, that no, we were going to go out and shoot the real ocean with a full-size shark, because the miniatures at that time really didn't work with water.
This is about a shark that is so big that it's just on sight, visually, it's terrifying. And to really make the picture sock home, we had to have a big, big shark.
So I had 2 drawings made, full-size elevations, or side views, of a 20-foot shark and a 30-foot shark. Stephen and David and Richard Zanuck, Sid Sheinberg came down and said, well, the 20-foot one looks okay, but doesn't look that formidable. And the 30-foot one looks really almost too big, it'd probably be comical. So how about something in between? So we ended up with something just slightly under 25 feet.
The main concern was getting the shark built, and would the shark work? And bearing in mind that at that time we're talking about something very primitive. We're not in the world of computer-generated stuff. We're not in the world of sophisticated animatronics. We're in the world of somebody dragging a plastic model of a shark.
Designing the shark was somewhat like designing a submarine. We had to do, you know, the elevations, and then we did station points or sections.
The $250,000 that we spent on the shark, and including all of the research, all of the mechanics that went into it, is a very small amount when you think of today's standards.
As the producers tried to figure out how to build a mechanical shark, Peter Benchley's novel Jaws was released in the winter of 1974.
Doubleday's resident genius, Alex Gottfried, the art director, came up with the final hardcover jacket, and he put this little tiny woman right at the top of this rising torpedo, and there it was. There was every Freudian nightmare you could imagine. There was every nightmare period that you can imagine. There was symbolism, direct implication, direct statement of danger, good-looking women, sex. It was a brilliant jacket.
Jaws quickly made the New York Times bestseller list. For the film's producers and director Steven Spielberg, the pressure was just beginning.
We were all scared. We were all scared.
In the winter of 1974, Peter Benchley's novel Jaws became a bestseller. Meanwhile, film producers Richard Zanuck and David Brown were struggling to bring the story of the man-eating shark to the big screen. Director Steven Spielberg was determined to make the movie Jaws as realistic as possible. Before shooting began, the filmmaker wanted some real-life shark footage to blend in with the mechanical models.
There are things that our shark couldn't do. We had a right-to-left shark, a left-to-right shark, a sea-set shark, but we really didn't have a shark that could swim away from us.
Ron and Valerie Taylor, a husband and wife dive team in Australia, were hired to get as much action footage of sharks as they could, going right to left, left to right, diving, ascending, attacking.
In February 1974, Spielberg gave the Taylors a list of 16 specific shots that he needed. But Ron Taylor knew the task was easier said than done.
The real live great white sharks in South Australia are only half the size of the mechanical shark.
To make the shark appear larger, the tailors tried using a doll, but it seemed fake on camera.
It was Richard Zanuck who came up with the brilliant idea, why don't we put a midget in a cage to make the sharks look bigger?
We figured that if they could get 16-foot sharks, if we could take this cage, and it's a cage that Ron and Valerie use to go down, submerge the cage, and go down and photograph sharks, if we could reduce this to a scale proportion of, let's say, 3/4 size, and we could get a small person 3/4 size, that we would have a relatively full-size 24, 25-foot shark.
Underwater photographer Valerie Taylor.
This little man came to us from Hollywood and to go down in the cages with the great white sharks and be filmed, and he couldn't even scuba dive. He was just a terrified little person.
And he was so panicked, so he just kept hyperventilating.
The half-sized man, little Carl Risso, was about to very reluctantly be forced into the cage. And if we hadn't have had a man there from the company, from Universal, to force him to do it, we would never have had the heart to.
The stuntman had reason to be terrified. Moments before he entered the water, a great white shark became tangled in a rope line holding the cage.
This shark virtually broke up the cage. The tail of the shark, during its thrashing, had gone into the boat and had ripped out the hydraulic cables that ran to the motor on the back. It ripped the winch off the boat, it hit the side of the boat and broke the timber, and the whole thing came tumbling down underwater towards Ron, who was filming the whole time. And the red hydraulic fluid was running across the deck, and Carl looked down and he said, "Is that my blood?"
Carl Risso was supposed to be in that cage, and it was his reluctance to get in that saved his life.
He was so afraid after that, we never got him in the cages again.
Almost as frightening as filming sharks was reading Peter Benchley's first draft of the screenplay. Universal exec Sid Sheinberg knew the script needed a major overhaul.
In all candor, when I read the draft that was delivered on Jaws, I was very disappointed because the draft went into a lot of what I considered peripheral elements in the book. And to me, the real strength of Jaws was the simple storyline.
The first draft by Peter Benchley was a transcript of his novel. That's always a difficulty when the author of the novel writes the screenplay.
Dick Zanuck said, first thing is we get rid of that backstory about the romance. Forget the romance. This is an A to Z adventure story about a shark.
With no time to waste, the producers brought in a new writer.
Howard Sackler was the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright of The Great White Hope. Fine writer and an experienced diver. Howard wrote a draft but did not wish to have credit.
Then Spielberg asked for advice from his friend, writer Carl Gottlieb.
Steven wasn't quite happy with the script, so he circulated it to some of his friends, including myself. I responded with a long memo about what I thought we should do. Early April of '74, I get a phone call from Steven. "I'm sitting with Zanuck and Brown at the Bel Air Hotel. We're talking about the script. I've just read them your memo. Can you come out?"
Peter Benchley wasn't happy with this turn of events.
When I saw the script being written and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten, and I couldn't imagine what they were trying to get.
Peter at one point referred to the rewrites on the screenplay as a gang rape of his work.
And it was difficult for Benchley to, as a screenwriter, to strip away all those things and change all of these characters that he had lived with.
Steven and Dick Zanuck and David Brown, we started talking about the script and my memo and what I would do if I were hired.
Spielberg knew exactly what he wanted the screenwriter to do.
We pruned all the undergrowth out of the script, including a mafia subplot about the mayor and the developers, and focused on the interaction between the men and the shark.
As Gottlieb continued to work on the script, Joe Alves was busy scouting locations.
What made Martha's Vineyard so right for the movie was not only Edgartown, which is so beautiful with white picket fences, but was this area here, this bay. This bay had the perfect depth we needed for our platform shark.
Producers agreed. Edgartown was the ideal spot for the film's location. Meanwhile, Steven Spielberg couldn't wait to find out if the mechanical shark was convincing enough to frighten moviegoers. Writer John Milius.
Steven called us and he said, you know, you got to come down and see the shark. This whole group of us go down to Burbank and we walked into this hangar, and here's this shark off in the distance, and this thing is really big. I mean, it's like a submarine. Steven turns on, plugs things in, and he's going to get the mouth to open, and the mouth opens, you know, and then, you know, everybody's looking inside, seeing how it works and everything. And George Lucas kind of crawls up in there. And so Steven thought it'd be funny to close the mouth on him. Well, he closes the mouth. Of course, it doesn't close very hard, just closes a little bit. But then you see George's legs sticking out the thing. It was really frightening, you know. And he's kind of kicking and all. Of course, when he gets out, the thing doesn't work anymore. Well, we all just ran like little kids. I thought, oh my God, he's gonna get fired. We broke the shark.
In the spring of 1974, just 2 months remained before production was scheduled to begin on Jaws. Producers Richard Zanuck and David Brown faced the difficult task of casting the film, but they were surprised to discover how many famous actors were eager to co-star with a fish. Several of Hollywood's leading men, including Jan Michael Vincent and Jeff Bridges, were considered for a role in Jaws. Macho icon Charlton Heston wanted to play the shark hunter Quint. Producer David Brown.
Charlton Heston was one of those considered. Having parted the Red Sea, we probably thought he might part the Atlantic for us. The point about the casting of Jaws, we needed actors who could dissolve into their characters and were not perceived by their starry persona.
36-year-old Lorraine Gary fit that bill perfectly. The veteran actress was known for her work in TV movies like The Marcus Nelson Murders. Spielberg picked Gary to play the police chief's wife, Ellen Brody.
I would probably not have been considered for the part had Steven not been familiar with my work.
There was some criticism of Steven when he cast Lorraine Gary because she was the wife of the studio head, Sid Sheinberg.
I don't think anyone who knew Lorraine's work would ever have made that type of a statement.
Lorraine was an accomplished actress. It wasn't just a case of nepotism.
It was painful to have to cope with being judged only as Sid's wife, but you know, that didn't last too long.
The nepotism controversy was the least of Spielberg's problems. In April of 1974, the director had only a few weeks to get his script ready before shooting began. Meanwhile, Spielberg was frantically searching to find the rest of his cast. That's when the director remembered a lanky 41-year-old actor named Roy Scheider, who played Gene Hackman's sidekick in The French Connection.
I went to a Christmas party with my agent one evening, and she walked me over to introduce me to two young men who were talking to each other. It was Steven Spielberg and Tracy Keenan Wynn. And when I walked over, they were talking about a shark coming out of the water and splitting a boat in half. A shark that cracks a boat. I thought, they're crazy.
But Scheider was soon hooked.
I didn't hesitate at the offer to play the part at all. I'd read the book, I thought it was fairly exciting, and in the conversation I had with Spielberg on the phone, we talked about the characters, how they would be different in the movie than they were in the book. He had plans to change those things so that these three men, although they had different motivations, were three characters at least you could root for.
Scheider was on board. For the part of Matt Hooper, the shark expert, Spielberg wanted 26-year-old Richard Dreyfuss. The actor's resume included films like American Graffiti and The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz.
Richard came up to Boston, dressed exactly like Hooper. He had little round wire glasses, he had a blue watch cap, he had the beard, and he walked in the door and Steven said, "Perfect, don't change a thing."
I turned it down when Steven asked me to do it. And I said, no. He said, "You want to do it?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because I'd rather watch this movie than shoot it." I said, "It's going to be a nightmare to shoot this film."
Dreyfuss quickly changed his mind.
I first decided to get involved because I saw the premiere of a film I made called The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. And I was so convinced that I was terrible and that I was the worst actor in the world and I would never get a job that I called Steven and I begged for the part because I figured if I'm working, when Duddy Kravitz opens, I'll be safe.
There was still one key role left, the crusty old shark hunter, Quint. Spielberg wanted grizzled veteran Lee Marvin for the part, but the actor wasn't interested in working with a novice director. Producers Zanuck and Brown selected another actor who they believed would be perfect. 46-year-old Robert Shaw had just completed a villainous role in The Sting. But the Irish actor had a dilemma. Production executive Bill Gilmore.
If he stayed too many days in America, he would be subject to American tax.
We found out after we started using him. He had to fly off to Canada every chance that he wasn't shooting.
On April 29, 1974, just a few days before the start of principal photography, Spielberg and screenwriter Carl Gottlieb headed to Martha's Vineyard. But with the script unfinished and the shark in dry dock back in California, they weren't fully prepared to begin filming.
Steven Spielberg was told we had to start the movie in May. We were forced to start Jaws because there was a threat of an actors' strike. And the studios, as they always do, had decreed that no movie would start production that could not be finished at the end of the contract with the actors because they didn't want to be stuck in the middle of shooting with the actors on strike.
The race was on. The question remained, would Steven Spielberg become the shark's first victim? In May 1974, the cast and crew of Jaws descended on Martha's Vineyard, an island 20 miles off the coast of Massachusetts. The Hollywood invasion was good for business and ripe for disaster. The residents of Martha's Vineyard hadn't seen so much commotion on their quiet island since 1969. That year, Senator Ted Kennedy was involved in a scandalous car accident in nearby Chappaquiddick. But that was nothing compared to the disruption caused by the Jaws film crew. Reporter Edith Blake wrote about the film for the local newspaper, the Vineyard Gazette, then turned her stories into a book.
There was a lot of complaining going on. People did object because they didn't know what the movie people were going to do.
There were a lot of people who didn't care for a Hollywood company shooting on their island. And there were a lot of local tradesmen and merchants who did care because we spent a lot of money.
Hotel owner Bob Carroll quickly ran the numbers.
I had just remodeled the Kelly House and spent all kinds of money. And instead of getting it open in May or June, I got it open in November. And by February, I was desperate. And three guys came in and said they wanted to do a movie. And they would like to rent 50 rooms for 5 weeks, starting in April. Oh God, I thought they came from heaven.
People complained about the traffic. They complained about the honey wagon parked outside their living room.
The locals were very suspicious of us, and they didn't know how we had greased our way in, and I'm not so sure how we did either.
A lot of people made a lot of money.
According to producer David Brown, some islanders had a different agenda.
There were a few environmentalists. One group actually put a dead small shark at the door of our production office as a reprimand.
Meanwhile, production designer Joe Alves was struggling with another obstacle. There were strict zoning laws which made constructing the set for Quint's house nearly impossible.
The selectmen were very, very touchy, and they said, well, it didn't pass code. And I said, well, you don't understand. This is not a building. This is an illusion.
When they were driving piles below the mean high water line to anchor this set, somebody said, you can't do that. You have to get Coast Guard permission. And Joe Alves, the designer, said, oh, how long does that take? And they said, 6 months. He said, fine, drive the piles. They'll deny us permission, we'll be gone.
Local politicians may not have liked the film crew, but local residents couldn't get enough of Hollywood on the Atlantic.
These extras came from all over the island, and everybody could get a part in it.
We tried to woo them over. We gave the local doctor a role in the picture. We gave other people who were key players on the city council. Actually, we used most all of the city council in a scene, and they were flattered by that.
Local legend Craig Kingsbury was asked to play doomed boater Ben Gardner.
I wanted a dirty old fisherman, and I said, well, what's the wages? Well, I think he said something like $10 an hour. I said, oh boy, I'm sitting on my butt to make that money.
On May 2nd, 1974, Jaws began filming on windswept State Beach near Edgartown. actor Jeffrey Kramer made a stomach-churning appearance.
That first day of principal photography for me, I remember being very nervous, very excited. I find the first body and throw up on the beach. I studied for years to throw up like that, you know.
Richard Dreyfuss didn't have an upset stomach. He was just upset, and he vented his frustration during the shoot.
It is not Steven's fault or anyone's fault. It is the fault of Universal Studios giving this film an arbitrary May 2nd start date, that the script was never together, and the script never got, in my estimation, to where my character should have been. And instead of it being an interesting character, it became a kind of nebulous function within the film. And as an actor, I am disappointed.
As shooting began, screenwriter Carl Gottlieb continued to refine the script.
One of the key elements when I started rewriting Jaws was to put some humor into plot and to make the characters believable, human.
In addition to his writing chores, Gottlieb was also cast to play newspaper publisher Harry Meadows. The part turned out to be more dangerous than expected.
One of the scenes that we were filming when Meadows was still the principal character was the discovery of Ben Gardner's boat. It was one of the earliest scenes we filmed on the water, and at one point I fell in the water. I just tumbled over the side head first into the icy waters of Nantucket Sound, where there are sharks.
Just days into the shoot, Spielberg was already falling behind his production schedule. Even though it was May, the water was too cold and the director was forced to delay filming the beach scenes. Plus, the shark wasn't ready for his debut. Spielberg anxiously counted down the days until mid-May, when the shark models arrived from California.
We allowed 6 weeks after the shark got to Martha's Vineyard for testing, taking it out to sea, and getting it ready to be photographed. Every day of the 6 weeks, it malfunctioned. It got to a point where I thought there may be a possibility that the movie could not have been finished.
Ironically, the menacing monster turned out to be allergic to the ocean.
As soon as we put the shark in the salt water, it started deteriorating all the electronics. We weren't prepared for that.
The producers were anxious to keep their problems and the shark under wraps.
The shark was shrouded in tarpaulins to keep its appearance a secret. Steven felt that if the shark was withheld from the public, it would be that much more exciting when it was finally revealed in the film. Except for the fact that the locals, if they could get a lens near the shark, would take a picture.
Eventually, photos of the 25-foot model were leaked to the media.
There was a lot of yelling and screaming about that. It looked very bad when it was just being dragged out to sea, or when you saw the inside of it. It was a bunch of wires and cables.
The complicated machine was stubborn from the start.
The fact that the shark had difficulty working is not only no secret, it's part of the legend of the making of the movie.
Because of the problems with the shark, we had more time than we ever anticipated to work on all the other scenes. And in my opinion, it's the work on the other scenes that makes the movie. The shark is terrific, but if you didn't care about these guys, the shark wouldn't mean anything.
The guys bonded at Spielberg's rented cabin.
Roy, Dick Zanuck, Carl Gottlieb, myself, Steven, Verna Fields, the editor, Verna Fields' son. We all ate every night together and basically rewrote or wrote the work.
What if this happened, or what if that happened? Or wouldn't it be funny if they did this?
Without Roy Scheider and Rick and Robert Shaw, this film would have been a royal headache. And I can't say this is an auteur movie in any way or a filmmaker's picture, because Roy and Rick and Robert have all contributed their own ideas to their own characters and to each other in such a way that this is sort of a co-op effort.
In fact, one of the most famous scenes in Jaws was a true collaboration.
Robert Shaw had a pretty good idea of how he wanted to play Quint, but what was missing was a motivation for his rather eccentric attitudes about killing these sharks.
According to screenwriter John Milius, Spielberg phoned for help with the crucial scene.
Well, if somebody's going to write a horrible scene about people being eaten in the water by sharks in World War II, I'm the guy that you're going to come to write it.
Quint reveals that he was on the USS Indianapolis during World War II. which had a terrible misadventure with sharks.
Sackler wrote a version, Spielberg wrote a version, I wrote a version, Shaw wrote a version.
You listen to the scene, you know who wrote it.
Robert Shaw took all the drafts that had come in, whether they were dictated by Milius, written by me, or pre-existing in the script by Sackler. He came into dinner one night and said, "I've had a go at that pesky scene." And he said, "Let me read it to you." And Shaw delivered the speech almost verbatim the way it was in the film.
On June 11, 1974, Spielberg was ready to film the Indianapolis scene, but Shaw wasn't.
Robert had the idea that he was going to really be drunk when he did the scene. This was an unfortunate decision. He couldn't concentrate, and it was hideously embarrassing.
Half of what you see in that Indianapolis speech is Robert Shaw absolutely blotto, and the other half is sober.
Robert called Stephen at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, "How badly did I humiliate myself?"
They came back the next day, and he shot the scene cold sober.
You know the thing about a shark, he's got lifeless eyes, black eyes, like a doll's eyes. When he comes at you, he doesn't seem to be living until he bites you. And those black eyes roll over white, and then you hear that terrible high-pitched screaming. The ocean turns red, and in spite of all the pounding and the hollering, they all come in, they rip you to pieces.
I fell in love with Robert Shaw for 2 days on location. I thought he was one of the most romantic, larger-than-life characters I had ever met. He had piercingly blue eyes. He was dear, bright, flirtatious, and drunk most of the time.
Robert was an alcoholic, and he really had a problem. He would start to drink usually in the afternoon.
Robert Shaw at one point said, "I wish I could stop drinking." Richard Dreyfuss took the glass out of his hand and hurled it over the side.
I took the drink and tossed it into the water. And at that moment, every drinker on the show, every single drinker went, "Oh, oh."
On some days he'd be hungover and it would affect his performance. Not so that you could see, but it bothered him.
He was also the kind of alcoholic where just one drink made the world of difference. I mean, sober, he was probably one of the most sensitive, charming, intelligent, and very generous people I've ever met. And then just one drink, and he would turn into a very competitive son of a bitch. And it was sad. It was really sad.
During the late spring of 1974, the Jaws production team was in trouble. A planned 55-day shooting schedule proved unrealistic, and as problems with the shark multiplied, the cast and crew began to get into mischief. By mid-June, most of the land scenes were in the can. But even though the ocean was still icy cold, Spielberg decided he could not delay shooting the film's opening sequence any longer. 27-year-old stunt woman Susan Baccalini played the shark's first victim. The director told her to think warm.
I knew there was nudity. A lot of times I didn't have my wetsuit on. And definitely I didn't have it on the top. So I got pretty cold.
Susan had been assured by everybody that she would not appear naked, certainly not from that angle. And indeed it was photographed so that it would be printed day for night and it would be shadowy and obscure and menacing. But because the negative had been improperly printed, there was Susan treading water with the camera drifting up beneath her. It just shocked everybody in the projection room. They stopped the film and said, "Reprint that sequence correctly."
Stephen said, "I almost got an X rating because of you." They were pulling me on the cables. We had 8 guys on each line, and they had marks on the beach that we had all planned out, and they would run this way, then this way, then this way, then this way. And as my hips, I would feel the tug on the opposite side, I would just immediately throw my arms and head violently the other way. and then my body would go that way.
Director of photography, Bill Butler.
The force of the water is tremendous, and this was putting terrible strains on her body. And she took all of this punishment.
Jaws pushed everyone to their limit. Shooting this movie was no day at the beach, even when it was.
The panic scenes in Jaws were filmed on the South Beach in Martha's Vineyard in late spring, long before the water warms up from the summer sun. Stephen had to beg, and people went in the water and gave us the required footage. But you can see when the shark has frightened everybody and people are fleeing from the ocean, they're not only fleeing the shark, they're fleeing the temperature.
A few lucky residents snagged parts in the film. Lee Fierro played Mrs. Kintner, the mother of a young boy who gets eaten by the shark.
When they asked me to be in it, I said yes. With qualifications, I didn't want to play the role saying four-letter words.
Chief Brody? Yes?
People have asked me over the years about that slap. I had to slap him 17 times in one day. In one take, I must have done it harder because it knocked off his glasses and they went flying.
Meanwhile, Spielberg was racing against the clock. Shooting dragged on and costs escalated. The young director knew his career might be hanging in the balance.
Yeah, at times, especially when you're by yourself at night, it weighs more heavily than during the working day when your mind is on getting good film. And it's sometimes at night you realize that it's a great responsibility and you're juggling a lot of cash. And it's sometimes very frightening.
What was more frightening was that the mechanical shark still didn't work properly. Spielberg was about to run out of scenes to shoot until production designer Joe Alves came up with an ingenious solution. Quint could harpoon the shark with a rope tied to floating barrels.
What saved us, actually, was the yellow barrels. By using the yellow barrels to substitute the shark's presence, it allowed us to keep moving, doing various sequences.
The film became leaner and meaner and more suspenseful because when the problem was the shark, and the problem was it wouldn't work, I had to resort to more Hitchcockian techniques to convince you that there was a shark in the water without having to show you the shark in the water, and I think that enhanced the movie and made it a better film.
Everybody said, oh, those guys are so smart, Stephen's so brilliant. He's entrapping us. He's getting us sucked into this. Just see a little thing here, a little fin there. You just see the victims, and then he shows the shark later. That wasn't the plan. The plan was to show the shark in the first scene, but we just didn't have it.
The shark didn't work because it had been designed and built on one coast and tested in fresh water, and it had to be functional and sink properly in salt water. Salt water eats everything. It ate connections, it ate hoses, it ate intentions, and it ate time. The ocean is implacable, and the ocean doesn't care.
Things turned ugly, and the weather got bad, and the shark was sinking, tail first, head straight up like the Titanic. All we could do was laugh.
Richard Zanuck and I saw our careers going to the bottom of Nantucket Sound with the first test of Bruce the shark, named for Steven Spielberg's lawyer, Bruce Rayner.
The mechanical shark was on the verge of destroying the film.
Sometimes it wouldn't stop until it ran into something. When it ran into something, its little shark nose would get pushed in, so you'd have to push it out and repaint it and repair the damage. It was an endless struggle.
Like all films, it was potential disaster, but in this case, the disaster seemed more than potential.
It was scary. I mean, every single day, problems introduced themselves to me. Problems I didn't know existed in the world, and I had to be on a team to help solve these problems. And 75% of the problems were unsolvable and never got worked out.
The smart-ass young crew used to refer to the film as flaws instead of Jaws.
Everyone found different ways to deal with delays.
The crew hooking little sand sharks, just catching sharks and killing them and cutting them up and throwing the bodies over as bait for more sharks to kill. There was a lot of pent-up hostility.
Scotch, vodka, gin, whatever.
No, we all have different methods. I do tend to drink when totally bored. Roy Scheider and sunbathes. Dreyfus just talks interminably. We've heard everybody's life story about 15 times now. Their sex lives, what their mother did, what their father did. I think I know every detail of those two men's lives, and it has been, to some extent, very boring.
We were taking liquid refreshment rather generously, otherwise booze, in which Robert Shaw suddenly said, "You know, I think this movie is going to be bigger than the bloody Sting." And Zanuck said, "Go to bed, Bob." He said, "No." He said, "As a matter of fact, I'll turn in all my excess salary." We were over schedule, which was a considerable amount, for a small percentage of the profits of this movie. And Zanuck said, "Go to bed, you're drunk."
Some of the effects of being on an island for 6 months is that everybody gets tired of seeing everybody else's face.
Richard Dreyfuss was growing increasingly tired of Robert Shaw.
Yeah, he did. He pitched my buttons. In private, he was very nice, and in public, he would become this terror.
He just made Dreyfuss's life miserable, just miserable. He would say things to him, really ugly things like, "Well, Richard, I suppose if there's room in our industry for another short Jewish character man, you could possibly have a career." And Dreyfuss would look at him like, is he kidding? Did he really say that?
When the actors weren't getting under each other's skin, they were flirting with the locals.
The crew and the cast certainly found a lot of eye candy, a lot of lovely ladies to look at, and for some people it was more than just looking.
Richard Dreyfuss was kind of popular with the young ladies of the area.
He was a bachelor, he was young, and he was ready to go. So he had a good time.
This is actually something that Steven Spielberg made up. It never happened. I didn't have success with the ladies on Martha's Vineyard. Yes, I was coming into my celebrity at that time, and I was kind of cocky and flirtatious, but it didn't get me anywhere. Let me assure you. Let me assure you that there's a lot of sex in this world that I've never had. And that was one of those summers.
There were probably 4 women to every man on the island. So how our crew got up in the morning, I don't know.
There were daily problems with a mechanical shark that crippled the production of the movie Jaws. The long delays made cast members testy. Everyone was coming down with a serious case of island fever, but the ordeal was far from over. On July 1st, 1974, Steven Spielberg was ready to start filming The Mechanical Shark. The underwater track system which controlled the giant fish was put in place. The crew crossed their fingers as Jaws was towed out to Cow Bay.
Word came the shark was ready. The big steel substructure was being floated out to the location. The producers were called. They started to sink the substructure down to the bottom where it would anchor, and the hydraulics and the pneumatic hoses malfunctioned despite all the practice and exercise.
It started to settle, and then it tipped, and it wound up going over. It looked like it was going over backwards right in front of our eyes, and it actually landed on its side. And just as it had settled, I heard my name called over the radio, and it was Dick Zanuck saying, "Is now a good time to come out and see the platform?"
Divers were needed to get the structure upright.
The salt literally ate the pneumatic tubes, and the ocean just kicked the hell out of the shark.
It's only when you go through making a picture on the water that you really understand how stupid that experience is.
Had I known about problems with the Mechanical Shark, had I known about the idiocy of my choosing to shoot on the ocean as opposed to inside a tank, on a tank set where it's safe, you can control the amount of weather. Had I known all this, I probably, it would have been a worse movie. It wouldn't have been as good of a movie.
We were testing the shark all the time, and you could literally walk down Edgartown's main street and you could hear the production on radio mic from different sources. and you would hear this.
The shark is not working. The shark is not working. Repeat, the shark is not.
We lived and died by that shark. The shark was more important in the script than the actors, or than anything. That shark had to work, or this whole project was sunk, literally.
The filmmakers didn't know what to do.
We had no more work other than having a shark in the shot. We went out and said, well, we'll just do our best. And the shark worked that day. That's the day we shot the shark coming up with Roy Scheider chumming.
Film critic Leonard Maltin.
When I think about Jaws, the first thing that comes into my mind is that incredible shot, the money shot, you might call it. And all of a sudden, the shark lurches out of the water, and Scheider turns around and, and responds.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
The line, I think you're going to need a bigger boat, was in the script, I think, once. And it just struck me funny, and Stephen funny. And we both agreed, let's try and use this again. So every time, as the situation became hairier and hairier, often, I think we ended 3 scenes with Brody murmuring, I think we're going to need a bigger boat. I think we're going to need a bigger boat.
The shark was finally starting to cooperate, but production lagged more than a month behind schedule. Great pains were taken to make sure the studio suits back at Universal didn't discover that the Jaws budget was about to burst.
We originally started with a close to $4 million budget, which was unrealistic. We didn't want to, advertise it to the studio. They thought it could be made for that.
Yes, there was a concern. Much of the film was storyboarded. What that means is that sketches were made of each shot. And the production office at Universal was informed of how many. We hid many sketches that they were never authorized, and we shot them as we could, whenever we could.
Jaws co-star Jeffrey Kramer.
The rumors were rampant on the set that we were over budget, over day, they were going to close it down.
We knew one thing: never stop shooting, never shut down on a picture like this. Never move, as the studio wanted us to, move back to the lot in a contained environment. 2 things happened. The whole picture can be called off, or at best, it just unravels and you end up making a poor picture. So we were determined to keep the studio away. Outside of this one little visit from Sid.
Sid Sheinberg, who had signed Stephen to his television contract at the studio and had approved his directing this feature for the studio, came out to the location to review what was going on and to perhaps make a difficult executive decision, which would have been to pull the plug at Martha's Vineyard, take whatever film there was, come back and finish it in Hollywood on the back lot.
Truth be known, I probably went primarily to visit my wife and to see Stephen as a friend. But I never went to Martha's Vineyard to quote, check up on the production.
Sid was coming to visit me, and Stephen, being a friend of ours, a personal friend, he was coming to visit Stephen. He was also coming to check the movie. The shark wasn't working or wouldn't be ready in time. The weather was chancy.
And there was a sense that it was harder than we thought it would be, that it was going to take longer than we thought it would. No one for a moment ever thought of firing Steven Spielberg.
But Spielberg remembered the situation differently.
I thought I'd be fired all the time. I mean, there was even a rumbling that I was about to be fired by the studio for basically being 100 days over. It was the most overscheduled I've ever been. And the budget went from like $4 to $9 million, which in those days, in 1974, that was a lot of money. But I was saved by my friends Sid Sheinberg and Dick Sanik, David Brown. They said if I got fired, they'd quit.
With that vote of confidence, Spielberg persevered. In August 1974, the Orca, Quint's shark hunting vessel, became the primary location for the rest of the shoot.
I purchased the boat and started technical drawings on it and added a pulpit, which is a thing that Quint goes out on, added a crow's nest, square cabins, and just made it basically more funky looking.
But the boat malfunctioned.
And one day you heard this.
The shark is working. Repeat. The shark is working. The boat is sinking. The boat is sinking. Help!
I got a panic phone call from the first AD, and he said, Bill, the Orca is apparently sinking. Apparently, it was going down like a stone, and it went under, and the actors were diving for their lives.
Roy Scheider was trapped below decks, and there were a lot of expensive cameras on deck, and the film, the day's work, was in the cameras, and that had to be saved. And people were shouting, save the cameras, and Roy Scheider was, what about the actors? Scheider had to break through a window to get out. Nobody got hurt, the boat was beached safely.
I had them grab the film and go over to the barge where they operate the shark, take fresh water and wash away the salt water because salt water would affect the film.
With luck, the image could be preserved. The apprentice editor got the job of putting this Panavision magazine with 1,000 feet of film into a bucket of water and carrying it on his lap on an airplane to the lab in New York City.
The lab processed it, and we didn't lose a foot.
After that disaster was averted, the director and producers had to wonder, what else could go wrong? The production of the movie Jaws was plagued with technical problems that tested the patience and endurance of the cast and crew. The filmmakers struggled to keep the film on track, but director Steven Spielberg knew his biggest challenge lay ahead, shooting the picture's dramatic ending. By August of 1974, Steven Spielberg was weeks behind schedule. Besides dealing with a mechanical shark that was at best temperamental, the director had to overcome another set of obstacles in order to finish his job.
One of the problems of shooting at sea is keeping a level horizon. If you bolt the camera to the deck, it does this all the time and the film is unwatchable. So the combination of using handheld cameras, picking low angles impressed upon the viewer, the endless immensity of the ocean, showing how insignificant the people were in relationship to the sea and the shark.
Director of photography Bill Butler utilized an innovative enclosure that kept the expensive film camera dry and allowed Spielberg to get some of his most exciting shots.
When you take the water box and put it right down next to the water, there is suddenly a psychological effect which produced a feeling that any moment the shark might be right there. You're so close to it.
With his production schedule and budget out of control, Spielberg needed to make sure the movie's complicated conclusion would go off without a hitch. The director and production designer, Joe Alves, planned every detail of the gruesome scene in which shark hunter Quint meets his death.
The sequence starts with Shaw says he's coming up. The shark comes up and breaks the stern on the Orca II. So we know that we need the Orca II with a replaceable balsa wood stern and the shark on a platform.
My death, going into the shark's jaws, it's a very unpleasant thing. The damn thing weighs about, I don't know how many tons, several tons, and the jaws absolutely come down on me with the hydraulic pressure, When you do it 14 or 15 times in this kind of weather, in the cold, slide right into it, and then the teeth come and bite you. Not very nice.
For the movie's climax, Spielberg decided to take a detour from the novel's ending by having the shark explode. Author Peter Benchley didn't agree with the filmmaker's decision.
Well, it was completely unrealistic. So I said to Steven, this ending is preposterous. And Steven said, after 2 hours, if I've got them, I can do what I want in the last 3 minutes. And I want the audience on their feet screaming. He was absolutely right. The fact that it was impossible is immaterial.
After 4.5 months, Spielberg finished location filming. During the wrap party at the Kelly House restaurant, the exhausted cast and crew lost all control.
We were sitting there, and I flicked a little piece of food on Verna Field's son's shirt. And he flicked another little piece back on my shirt. And then I flicked a little piece on Dreyfus, and then Dreyfus flicked it on somebody else, and within about 10 minutes, it really began.
Without realizing it, we all went a little crazy.
People picking up wads of moose and wads of salad and wads of fish, and it just got to be a very funny food fight.
Everybody was throwing food. But Stephen was in the middle of it.
And the kelp came out of the kitchen and just stood there and watched it. David Brown and Richard Zanuck were very upset. They didn't think it was very nice of us to have done that.
Steven Spielberg and Richard Dreyfuss didn't care. All they wanted to do was get off the island.
They got to dry land, they got to a hotel, they got to a place where they did not have to get on a boat the next day and pitch about in cold water. And the realization of that made them giddy with excitement. They went to the bar and screamed, "It's over, it's over." So they just made a spectacle of themselves.
Stephen had held it together the entire time under a pressure that I couldn't even begin to calculate. You know, the studio was on his ass every minute. But when we got on the plane to go back to LA, he was like fried. And I remember his eyes were like one of those Warner Brothers cartoons. You know?
There are no memorable moments on Jaws for me. There's a lot of moments that I like to forget.
In October 1974, Spielberg was finally ready to shoot a few remaining underwater scenes. Unlike exteriors where the horizon needed to be visible, these could be done in a studio tank. Stuntman Richard Warlock doubled for Richard Dreyfuss in the cage attack sequence. The daunting task of editing Jaws still loomed. Spielberg shot 400,000 feet of film. The job of cutting down the movie to 11,000 feet fell to editor Verna Fields.
One of the things that Stephen had done during the course of the shooting was ask me to sit with Verna Fields, the editor, and go through every frame of shark footage and see if it looked okay, if it looked phony. Because the one thing he said, and he was right, that would kill this movie is if people could laugh at it.
When you stopped it down to a still, you could see all of its flaws. The secret of the shark was that it was always moving and you didn't get too good of a look at it.
But looks were not everything. Spielberg still needed to find the right voice for the shark. That fall, composer John Williams was signed to write the Jaws score. Williams had just finished working on Spielberg's previous film, The Sugarland Express.
The character of the shark, of course, was an enticing thing to try to musicalize.
Johnny Williams was the natural choice to do Jaws. And he may have saved the picture because when we didn't have the shark, he put it in. So he filled in the gaps that we didn't have with our mechanical monster.
There were one or two places where I seem to remember Stephen suggesting that even though the shark was not in the immediate environs of the particular scene, that we would use the shark theme to suggest to the audience that the shark was there, and then finally deliver a coffee can in place of the shark to establish a kind of red herring or surprise.
Steven Spielberg was a great storyteller. He understood, as certainly John Williams did, that you want to prepare your audience. Sometimes you want to take them off guard, but sometimes you want to prepare them.
I remember playing these low notes on the piano for him very simply, and it sounded sort of imbecilically reduced to a note or two in the beginning. And he sort of laughed a little bit, and he said, "Do you think it will work?" And I said, "Well, I think it will. When the orchestra does these low, portentous notes, it'll be kind of scary and very identifiable." So he just said, "Well, let's try it."
Now that Jaws had its voice, all that remained was to see if the film had teeth. Composer John Williams added the final touch to the film Jaws with his memorable and frightening score. The soundtrack was definitely hair-raising, but no one could predict whether Bruce, the mechanical shark, would scare up movie audiences. On the night of March 26, 1975, moviegoers in Dallas got the first peek at Jaws. The sneak preview followed a showing of The Towering Inferno.
Not until the first screen did we know that we had a giant hit, because the shark to us was so phony. We knew the shark like our best friend or our worst friend, and we knew how fake it was.
Richard Zanuck and I were tense. We had a few drinks, And we passed the theater where it said A Big Fish Story or something like that, and there was a huge line.
The audience got into it really quickly, and from the minute the film started, it started to roll out, and you could feel the excitement, and the audience was totally transported.
Despite the favorable response, Spielberg wanted to tinker further with the film.
The scene where Ben Gardner's head pops out of the boat was reshot in Verna Fields' swimming pool as an afterthought by Steven, who was unsatisfied with the way the film was in the movie, and there was no budget for retakes, but he said, "I'll pay for it myself."
Craig Kingsbury, who played the part of Ben Gardner, posed for a lifelike mold of his head.
First they rubbed some kind of grease on my face, and then they put the plaster on, you know, to set the mold, and then hardened and took it off. It was like being in jail with your head in a jug.
They assembled the necessary equipment, went out to Verna's house, poured half a gallon of milk into the pool to give it a proper opaqueness, tarped it over to make it look like night, and shot what is one of the scariest shots in movies in an afternoon in Van Nuys.
On March 28, 1975, producers held another screening of Jaws near Long Beach, California.
Our second preview was held at Lakewood with the new shot in it. And again, thousands and thousands of people packed in there. And it was the same, if not bigger, reaction. It was just astounding.
The audience went nuts. They were beside themselves. We were afraid that there might have been a couple of walkouts. They were just people who came out to throw up and then went back in.
Universal executives decided to take advantage of the excitement by opening the movie in more than 400 theaters, which was considered a wide release in 1975.
I don't think it required an enormous amount of genius to figure out that here's a picture about swimming in the summer, and you want to have it available to the largest number of people that can possibly see it during the summer within reason.
When Jaws came out, it was the first film to play in multiple theaters in a big summer opening, and that is now the pattern for big tentpole pictures.
We had an extraordinary logo of the girl on the water and the shark coming up. It was certainly one of the first pictures to utilize mass television saturation in a wide release.
Audiences lined up for blocks when Jaws premiered on June 20th. 3 days after the film's initial release, Jaws swallowed up more than $7 million at the box office, a new record for an opening weekend.
Richard Zanuck and I were in the Carlisle Hotel in New York when we received a call from Sidney Sheinberg shortly after the opening of Jaws. And I remember what he said. He said, "Do you guys know how rich you're going to be?"
The movie's success came as a surprise to Richard Dreyfuss.
And he was very dubious about whether we were going to be a hit.
Dreyfuss second-guessed himself during the shoot.
I had made a mistake. Thank you, Dick Zanuck and David Brown, but that's the truth. I'm only criticizing myself, but as an actor, it was a mistake.
Richard Dreyfuss's opinion of Jaws was abysmal. He thought it was the worst produced film he had ever been on.
I had very low expectations. I went to see it, and I have never, ever in my life witnessed that reaction to a movie.
He called Sidney Sheinberg, the head of the studio in California, at maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, or so the story goes, and said, "The film is great. If I had known it was that good, I would have had a better time making it."
The initial buzz on the film Jaws was excellent. Universal executives spent millions promoting their studio's latest blockbuster and watched in amazement as the movie became a cultural phenomenon. During the summer of 1975, Jaws became the first movie in history to gross more than $100 million.
One of the reasons the film just swept around the world, making tons of money, because you could sit in India and not even know English and watch the film and know what was going on, because everyone has that universal fear of the unknown.
That summer, everyone was talking about Jaws and sharks. On July 10, 1975, Universal Studios took out a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal, reminding the public that it's a movie, too.
The shark was on every network, every newspaper, every time somebody had a swimming accident, it was attributed to Jaws.
It wasn't just a movie, it was a phenomenon. People weren't going in the ocean.
Meanwhile, Jaws mania made 27-year-old Steven Spielberg a hot commodity in Hollywood.
Jaws was the crucial turning point in Steven Spielberg's career. He'd done a couple of TV movies that were well received, and he had one pretty successful theatrical feature to his credit, but nothing as big as Jaws.
The film also turned cast members into bona fide stars.
People would stop me and they, "Hey, Jaws!" So that was my name for a while. "Hey, Jaws, how you doing?" They would ask me, "Hey, you got a bigger boat?"
On September 8, 1975, 11 weeks after the film premiered, Jaws glided past The Godfather to become the highest-grossing film at that time. Sales of Peter Benchley's novel went through the roof.
Jaws was on the New York Times bestseller list for 44 weeks and sold 126,000 copies. Paperback, it sold 5 million before the movie and 5 million after the movie, and another 10 million around the world.
The Jaws phenomenon reverberated throughout America.
Jaws changed the pop culture in the 70s because the culture assimilated the images, it took the music, and it gave it back to us as sketches on Saturday Night Live, in Mad magazine covers. The image of that shark coming up underneath a helpless swimmer became one of the most frequent political cartoons of the period.
As the money rolled in, Steven Spielberg took a well-deserved vacation from the Jaws hoopla with his friend John Milius. Oddly enough, after being cooped up on Martha's Vineyard for several months, Spielberg retreated to another island getaway, Hawaii.
I remember we were staying in Waikiki. There was a nice swell running, and I said, I'm going to go surfing. And I came in and I said, you should really go out on a outrigger. And I can surf right next to the outrigger, and, you know, we can all howl as we come in and stuff. And Steven said, I'm not going out there. I said, why not? He says, they're waiting for me. They know what I've done. They know I've made Jaws, and they're waiting. He was always convinced the sharks had it out for him.
In the summer of 1975, Jaws hit the big screen and quickly became the highest-grossing film in motion picture history. But just as impressive was the way the movie impacted American pop culture. In February 1976, Jaws received 4 Academy Award nominations for film editing, sound, original score, and Best Picture. Director Steven Spielberg was notably overlooked.
It's an anomaly that a film is nominated for Best Picture and the director doesn't get a nomination. And I think Steven was hurt that the Academy didn't recognize him.
Steven not getting nominated was a terrible thing, and I don't understand it. I just don't understand it.
Still, no one was calling Jaws flaws anymore. At the Oscar ceremony in April, the film won Academy Awards for editing, sound, and score.
I was conducting the orchestra that year in the show, and when it was announced that I was to be the winner of the Oscar, I had to put my baton down, run up on the stage and gather the Oscar, and then quickly get back to the orchestra pit and continue to conduct the show. So it was quite an exciting moment.
A contribution of Verna Fields, who won an Academy Award for the editing of Jaws, was great.
Jaws didn't win the Best Picture Oscar. That award went to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Some felt there was a Jaws backlash.
It was such a phenomenal success that Hollywood reacted negatively to it.
But there was still a feeding frenzy for Jaws, and the public was hungry for more.
Because of the large success of the first one, it was inevitable that they were going to do a sequel.
Richard Zanuck and David Brown, the producers of the first film, signed on to produce Jaws 2. They quickly went to work recruiting the original cast members, without their now super hot director.
We didn't have Steven. Stephen said he would never do a sequel.
I didn't want to be noted for having just done Jaws, so I only did 2 of them.
Jaws 2 was really different for me. I made a ton of money on that, which was really nice.
Of course, I'm not sorry about Jaws 2. I mean, that's kind of like sorry about not falling down a flight of stairs.
A young TV director named Jeannot Zwark was signed to helm the sequel. The story once again centered around a great white shark which terrorizes Chief Brody and beach-going tourists. Production on Jaws 2 kicked off in August 1977 on Martha's Vineyard and in the warmer waters off Florida. But filming on the ocean hadn't gotten any easier.
The irony is the second Jaws that was shot in Pensacola had exactly the same problems. Only this time it was worse. We had 14 boats.
It was now a big in-studio project, where before it was a small project. So they spent 10 times the money on the second one, building the shark.
In June 1978, Jaws 2 cruised into theaters with a catchy slogan.
The marketing department at Universal came up with a wonderful line. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water. Jaws 2.
It was the ringing a little more from the original concept of Jaws. It wasn't that different, but it had none of the surprise and none of the character drama.
All things considered, I thought it was a pretty good sequel. Tough to follow that other film.
Jaws 2 did not receive the critical acclaim achieved by the original. But audiences didn't care. The movie grossed more than $100 million at the box office. Studio executives were eager to start work on Jaws 3. Zanuck and Brown were asked to resume their role as producers.
We drew the line at Jaws 3. We didn't want to do it. But we did have an idea for Jaws 3, which to this day we mourn not having pursued. The idea for Jaws 3 was to combine our efforts with the National Lampoon, the National Humor magazine, and do a movie titled Jaws 3, People Nothing, which would be a send-up of Jaws.
But the studio said, oh, you're going to ruin the franchise. It's got to be a very serious picture. It's got to be another screamer. And we said, well, we're out.
The rest of the cast was out too. The decision was made to try something different with the third Jaws film. The reins were handed to production designer Joe Alves.
Jaws 3 was, an opportunity to direct a major movie, and I had initially come up with the idea of 3D because I wanted to take the onus off of a third.
Jaws 3D starred Dennis Quaid as Chief Brody's eldest son. The film's plot revolved around a great white shark that threatens a seaside amusement park. While shooting in a closed tank environment made filming easier, Alves found that making a 3D movie presented its own set of challenges.
It had all the sequel problems in trying to equal the first, which is always difficult, and then I had to build cameras while we were shooting.
The second Jaws sequel was released in July 1983 to poor reviews. The 3D format wasn't enough of a draw. Without the original cast, the film lost much of its impact.
Jaws 3D had 3D going for it, except the 3D wasn't very good or very persuasive or very interesting.
Jaws 3 is not really a Jaws, and it was a mistake to do it.
As long as pictures with Jaws in the title would make money, the studio, I guess, had an obligation to its stockholders to keep making Jaws movies.
In 1986, Universal gave the green light to a fourth Jaws installment. But studio executives realized that for the film to have audience appeal, a familiar face was needed.
Jaws 4, we were forced into doing the picture a certain way because of our inability to get cast. And the only one that we could persuade, and that wasn't easy, was Lorraine.
The decision to do Jaws 4, 10 years after I had done anything, was clearly about money. I got a lot of money, and I had the pleasure of having an above-the-title billing, which I'd never, ever had before. And that's why I did it.
In Jaws: The Revenge, a great white shark preys upon the surviving Brody family members in the Bahamas. Principal photography wrapped on the film in May of 1987. To no one's surprise, the early buzz wasn't good.
They were made for monetary gain, not artistic gain.
The iron law of sequels is that only the last one loses money.
A mistake is what the plot of Jaws 4 was.
Jaws was one of the most popular movies of all time, but the string of sequels that followed couldn't match the original's success. In the summer of 1987, Jaws: The Revenge was about to be released, and critics prepared to attack. That July, the third Jaws sequel opened to scathing reviews.
Jaws 4: The Revenge was so obviously a cheap piece of junk that was being foisted on the public that the public stayed away.
It's over. It's over. We've ripped this thing apart, and everyone else has too. This concept has been shredded and diced and pureed, and there's nothing left.
The once menacing shark was now a punchline.
Shark still looks fake.
In the years since the original Jaws was released, the movie garnered numerous awards and honors. In 2001, the U.S. Library of Congress selected Jaws for inclusion in the National Film Registry. The American Film Institute ranked Jaws as the #2 thriller of all time, just behind Hitchcock's Psycho.
The legacy of the film, I'm the worst person to ask that question to. I think the fact that we all got work after Jaws came out is legacy enough.
Jaws helped boost the careers of many of its cast members. In 1977, 29-year-old Richard Dreyfuss became the youngest person to ever win a Best Actor award for The Goodbye Girl.
In those days, I took certain things for granted. I don't take very much for granted anymore.
Roy Scheider appeared in a number of critically acclaimed films, including the 1979 movie All That Jazz. And in 2001, he was featured in a self-help book called Acting Well. But no matter what Scheider does, he will always owe a debt of gratitude to Jaws.
It made me a household name, as the expression goes. I mean, from that film on, people knew who Roy Scheider was.
Lorraine Gary found fulfillment behind the camera. The actress spends her time producing advocacy films for a group called the Feminist Majority.
I've been working with them on all sorts of political issues, and my job, other than raising money and raising consciousness, is to make documentaries.
Actor Robert Shaw died of a heart attack in 1978, but his contribution to Jaws and its legacy still endures. Richard Zanuck and David Brown have produced numerous hit films since Jaws. In 1990, Zanuck and his wife, Lily, received the Best Picture Oscar for producing Driving Miss Daisy. Meanwhile, the creator of Jaws has dedicated himself to saving real-life sharks.
Peter Benchley now works extensively with the World Wildlife Fund, trying to mend the image of the shark and to save those sharks that are becoming endangered, partly as a result of the fear brought about by the film and the book.
The demand for shark fins and other shark products has increased to a point where these animals that used to be considered throwaways or nuisances or whatever are now being prized, taken, and slaughtered.
These days, the last surviving full-scale model of Bruce the Shark isn't doing so well either. He has been relegated to a junkyard in LA's San Fernando Valley. But just a few miles away, on the Universal Studios back lot, his reincarnation performs obediently for tourists hundreds of times a day. In the end, the story of Jaws is a tale of a young director who survived the terror of a mechanical shark to become one of Hollywood's greatest filmmakers. From E.T. to Schindler's List, from Close Encounters to Saving Private Ryan, Steven Spielberg has dazzled audiences with his cinematic vision, all built upon the tough lessons he learned on Jaws.
We were all kind of veterans after that movie was over. We went through a war, and we survived the war. And we eventually achieved a modicum of victory because of the results of the movie.
Still, the accomplished director remains a little superstitious.
Steven tells the story of going to a restaurant and the waitress said, "Our special today is shark." Steven said, "I don't eat them, they won't eat me."
Dun, 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 dun.
It's not the time it takes to take the take that takes the time. It's the time it takes between the takes that takes the time that takes to take.
I've never drunk in private life or at work.
The head, the tail, the whole damn thing.
The shark is not working. Repeat, the shark is not.
What saved me and why I survived Jaws was because I didn't know any better.
You know, I think you've covered everything.